I was 21 years old when I watched my best friend die. His name was Thomas Edward Mitchell, though everyone called him Tommy, and I held his hand until the very last breath left his body, there in that frozen field outside Bastogne, Belgium, in December of 1944. My name is James Callaghan. Most folks call me Jack. I was born in 1923 in a small town called Millbrook, about 40 miles north of Boston, Massachusetts. I've lived a long life now, seen things change in ways I never could have imagined when I was a young man. But there are moments that stay with you, moments that define who you are and who you'll become. And that moment, holding Tommy's hand as the light faded from his eyes, that moment made me into the man I am today. I've never told this story fully to anyone. Not to my wife, God rest her soul. Not to my children or grandchildren. Some memories are too heavy to share, too sacred to speak aloud. But I'm an old man now, and before I join Tommy and all the others on the other side, I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to remember. Before we continue, if you're finding this story meaningful, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be heard, and your support helps share them with others who need to hear them too. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Back to 1941, when the world changed forever. I remember exactly where I was when I heard about Pearl Harbor. It was a Sunday afternoon, December 7th. I was sitting in my family's living room, listening to the radio with my father and mother. The fire was crackling in the hearth, and my mother had just brought out a plate of her famous apple pie. Everything felt so normal, so ordinary. And then the announcement came through, and nothing was ever ordinary again. My father, a veteran of the Great War himself, set down his coffee cup with trembling hands. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. He knew what was coming. He knew that his only son would soon be called to fight, just as he had been called a generation before. I enlisted in January of 1942. I could have waited for the draft, but that didn't feel right. My country had been attacked, and I wanted to do my part. My mother cried for 3 days straight before I left for basic training. My father shook my hand and told me to keep my head down and come home alive. Simple instructions turned out to be the hardest ones I ever tried to follow. Basic training was at Fort Benning, Georgia. If you've never been to Georgia in the summer, count yourself lucky. The heat was oppressive, like trying to breathe through a wet wool blanket. We trained for 16 hours a day, learning how to shoot, how to march, how to survive. But more than anything, we learned how to be soldiers, how to follow orders without question, how to push our bodies beyond what we thought was possible. That's where I met Tommy Mitchell. He was assigned to the bunk next to mine on my 3rd day at Benning. I remember looking up and seeing this tall, lanky kid with a shock of red hair and a grin that seemed to take up half his face. He stuck out his hand and said, "Thomas Mitchell from Chicago. But you can call me Tommy, everyone does." I shook his hand and introduced myself. "Jack Callaghan, Boston." "Boston, huh?" He grinned even wider. "I guess we're supposed to be rivals then, Cubs and Red Sox and all that." I couldn't help but laugh. "I think we've got bigger things to worry about than baseball right now." "True enough," he said, tossing his duffel bag onto his bunk. "But if we're going to survive this thing, we might as well have something to argue about." And just like that, we were friends. It's strange how war does that. How it strips away all the normal barriers between people and connects you to strangers in ways that civilian life never could. Within a week, Tommy and I were inseparable. Within a month, he felt like the brother I never had. Tommy was 2 years younger than me, just 19 when he enlisted. He'd grown up on the south side of Chicago, the middle child of 7 kids in an Irish Catholic family. His father worked at the stockyards, and Tommy had been working there too before the war, hauling carcasses and loading trucks. It was brutal work, but it had made him strong, stronger than he looked, with that skinny frame of his. But what I remember most about Tommy wasn't his strength, it was his kindness. In a place designed to turn boys into killers, Tommy never lost his humanity. He was always the first to help a struggling soldier, the first to share his rations with someone who was hungry, the first to crack a joke when morale was low. He had this way of making everyone around him feel like things were going to be okay, even when we all knew they probably wouldn't be. We finished basic training in June of '42 and were assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. If you know anything about World War II, you know about the 101st. We were paratroopers, trained to jump out of perfectly good airplanes and land behind enemy lines. It was dangerous work, maybe the most dangerous in the entire army. But there was a pride that came with it, a sense that we were part of something special. The training for airborne was even more intense than basic. Jump school at Fort Benning, then advanced training at various locations around the country. We learned how to pack our own chutes, how to land without breaking our legs, how to fight immediately after hitting the ground. We became experts in demolitions, close quarters combat, and survival behind enemy lines. Tommy took to it like a fish to water. Despite his fear of heights, something he confessed to me one night after a few too many beers, he became one of the best jumpers in our company. I asked him once how he did it, how he could throw himself out of a plane when he was terrified of being up high. He thought about it for a moment, then said, "Because I'm more scared of letting you guys down than I am of falling. If I stay in that plane while the rest of you jump, what kind of man does that make me?" That was Tommy, always thinking about others before himself. By the spring of 1943, we were shipped overseas to England. We were billeted in a small village called Aldbourne, in the English countryside. It was beautiful there, green and peaceful, so different from the chaos we were training for. The locals welcomed us with open arms, grateful for our presence, knowing that our being there meant their liberation might finally be coming. We trained constantly, preparing for the invasion that everyone knew was coming. We just didn't know when or where. There were countless exercises, practice jumps, mock assaults. We became a tight unit, Company E of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Easy company, brothers in arms. In those months in England, I got to know Tommy even better. We spent our rare free time together, exploring the countryside, visiting pubs in the village, writing letters home. Tommy wrote to his mother every single week without fail. He would read me parts of his letters sometimes, and I was always struck by how much love he had for his family. He talked about his younger siblings with such affection, describing their personalities and quirks in vivid detail. He talked about his mother's cooking, her Irish stews and soda bread. He talked about sitting on the front porch with his father on summer evenings, listening to Cubs games on the radio. "That's what I'm fighting for," he told me once, folding up a letter and tucking it into an envelope. "Not for some grand idea of freedom or democracy, for them, for my family, so they can keep having those ordinary moments without worrying about bombs falling on their heads." I understood exactly what he meant. When I thought about what I was fighting for, it wasn't the flag or the country in some abstract sense. It was my parents in their living room by the fire. It was the streets of my hometown in autumn, covered with fallen leaves. It was the life I wanted to have someday, the family I hoped to build. We were fighting so that ordinary life could continue, so that the people we loved could be safe. The invasion finally came on June 6, 1944. D-Day. The day that would change the course of history. I remember the night before, like it was yesterday. We were at the airfield, checking and rechecking our equipment, going through our pre-jump routines. The tension was unbearable. Everyone knew that many of us wouldn't be coming back. Some guys were praying, some were joking around, using humor to mask their fear. Some just sat quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Tommy and I sat together on a bench near our plane, watching the sun set over the English countryside. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and peaceful, completely at odds with what was about to happen. "Jack," Tommy said quietly, "if something happens to me over there, I need you to do something for me." I looked at him sharply. We'd made an unspoken agreement not to talk like this, not to acknowledge the very real possibility that one or both of us might not survive. But the words were out now, hanging in the air between us. "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said, though we both knew I couldn't promise that. Tommy shook his head. "Just listen. If something happens, I need you to write to my mother. Tell her I wasn't scared. Tell her I was thinking of her at the end. Can you do that?" I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he'd be fine, that we'd both make it through and laugh about this conversation years from now. But I saw the seriousness in his eyes, and I knew I owed him an honest answer. "I'll tell her," I said, "but you're going to be the one writing to her after this is all over. You're going to tell her yourself how brave you were." Tommy smiled, that familiar grin lighting up his face. "Deal." We shook hands, and then it was time to board the planes. The jump itself was chaos. We dropped into Normandy in the early hours of June 6th, but the anti-aircraft fire was so intense that many planes were scattered off course. I landed in a flooded field, miles from my intended drop zone, up to my chest in cold water, completely disoriented. The sound of gunfire and explosions was everywhere, and I couldn't find anyone from my unit. I spent the next several hours moving through the darkness, trying to navigate toward our objective, using only my compass and the stars. I encountered other scattered paratroopers along the way, some from the 101st, some from the 82nd Airborne. We formed ad hoc groups, completing whatever missions we could, taking out German positions, securing crossroads, disrupting enemy communications. It wasn't until late the next day that I finally reunited with what was left of Easy Company. And there was Tommy, grinning at me like we'd just met up after a day at the beach. "Took you long enough," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost." I wanted to hug him, to tell him how terrified I'd been, that I'd never see him again. But soldiers don't do that. We just nodded at each other, the relief visible in our eyes, and got back to work. The following months were brutal. After Normandy, we fought our way through France, liberating towns and villages as we went. The French people greeted us as heroes, showering us with flowers and wine and kisses. But there was always another battle waiting, always more Germans to fight, always more friends to lose. In September of '44, we participated in Operation Market Garden, the massive airborne assault into the Netherlands. It was supposed to end the war by Christmas. Instead, it was a disaster. We jumped into Eindhoven and fought our way north, trying to secure a corridor for the ground forces, but the operation failed, and thousands of Allied soldiers died for nothing. Tommy and I both survived Market Garden, though not without scars. I took a piece of shrapnel in my left leg during a firefight in Weigel. Tommy carried me half a mile to a field hospital, refusing to leave my side, even when the medics tried to send him back to the line. He sat with me through the night, talking to keep me awake, telling stories about Chicago and his family, and all the things we were going to do after the war. "We're going to open a bar together," he decided sometime around 3 in the morning, when the morphine was making everything hazy and dreamlike. "Callahan and Mitchell's. Best Irish pub on the East Coast. We'll serve my mother's stew and your mother's apple pie, and we'll tell war stories to anyone who'll listen." "Sounds good to me," I murmured, drifting in and out of consciousness. "And we'll never talk about the bad parts," he continued, his voice getting softer. "Just the funny stuff. Like that time Henderson accidentally set his pants on fire trying to light a cigarette, or when Sergeant Williams fell asleep during a briefing and started snoring so loud the colonel thought we were under mortar attack. I laughed, even though it hurt. Keep talking, I said. I like hearing your voice. I know you do, he said. That's why I never shut up. My wound wasn't serious enough to send me home, though part of me wished it had been. After 2 weeks of recovery, I was back with the unit, and we were preparing for our next deployment. We were pulled off the line in late November and sent to a rest area in France, where we were told we'd have time to recover and receive replacements. But then the Germans launched their last major offensive of the war. On December 16th, 1944, 3 German armies smashed through the Allied lines in the Ardennes forest of Belgium. It was the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle American forces would fight in World War II. Within days, the situation was critical. The Germans were pushing toward Antwerp, threatening to split the Allied forces in two. And right in their path was a little town called Bastogne. The 101st Airborne was rushed to Bastogne to defend it. We arrived on December 19th, piling out of trucks into a snow-covered landscape that looked like something from a Christmas card. But there was nothing festive about what awaited us. Bastogne was a crucial crossroads, and the Germans needed to take it to continue their advance. What followed was a siege that lasted for weeks, with our forces completely surrounded by German troops. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and running desperately low on supplies. The weather was brutal, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snow piling up around us. We had summer uniforms, inadequate winter gear, and not enough food or ammunition. But we held. Day after day, the Germans attacked, and day after day, we pushed them back. We fought in the snow and the fog, in forests so thick you couldn't see the enemy until they were right on top of you. We watched friends die from bullets and shells and frostbite, and we kept fighting because there was no other choice. Tommy was incredible during those weeks. Despite the cold, the hunger, the constant danger, he never lost his spirit. He organized a rotation system for our foxholes, making sure everyone got chances to warm up at the few fires we could risk lighting. He shared his rations with soldiers who had none. He kept up a constant stream of encouraging words, reminding everyone that help was coming, that we just had to hold on a little longer. "We're screaming eagles," he said during one particularly bad night, when the German artillery had been pounding our positions for hours. Eagles don't quit, eagles don't surrender, and eagles definitely don't die in this frozen hellhole. That got a few laughs, which was exactly what everyone needed. On Christmas Eve, 1944, the Germans launched a massive attack on our positions. The fighting was the worst I had experienced in the entire war. Tanks, infantry, artillery, everything the Germans had was thrown at us. At one point, I found myself in hand-to-hand combat with a German soldier in my foxhole, struggling over my rifle while bullets flew overhead. I won that fight, but I still see that soldier's face in my dreams sometimes. He was young, maybe even younger than me. Just another kid who'd been sent to fight and die for reasons beyond his understanding. We held the line that day, barely. When the sun finally set and the firing died down, Tommy and I sat in our foxhole, too exhausted to speak. The snow was stained red all around us. The air smelled of gunpowder and death. After a long silence, Tommy spoke. "Merry Christmas, Jack." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Merry Christmas, Tommy. My mother's probably sitting down to dinner right now," he continued, his voice wistful. "The whole family would be there, all my brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, cousins. The house would smell like ham and mashed potatoes and her special gravy. My little sister Molly would be singing Christmas carols. My father would be pretending to read the newspaper while sneaking looks at the presents under the tree." "Tell me about Molly," I said, wanting to hear more, wanting to be transported away from this frozen nightmare, even just for a moment. "She's 11, Tommy said, a smile creeping onto his face despite everything. "The baby of the family. Red hair like me, but with these big blue eyes that can get her out of any trouble. She's got a voice like an angel, I swear. Used to sing in the church choir before I left. I promised her I'd be there for her 12th birthday. That's in March. You'll make it, I said. We'll both make it. Tommy nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We'd both seen too much by then to believe in certainties. The day after Christmas was when it happened. December 26th, 1944. The Germans launched another assault on our position, trying to break through our lines one more time before their offensive ran out of steam. We were dug in on the outskirts of a small forest, overlooking a snow-covered field. The fog was thick that morning, limiting visibility to just a few dozen yards. Tommy and I were in adjacent foxholes, about 10 feet apart. We'd been there all night, taking turns sleeping in short shifts, trying to stay warm enough to keep functioning. My feet were numb, and I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, but when the German attack began, all of that faded away. The adrenaline kicked in, and suddenly I was alert, focused, alive. The first wave came through the fog like ghosts, grey shapes materializing out of the white mist. We opened fire, cutting them down before they reached our lines. But more kept coming, wave after wave, pouring out of the forest on the far side of the field. The fighting was intense, confused, terrifying. I fired my rifle until it jammed, cleared the jam, and kept firing. I threw grenades until I ran out. At some point, a mortar round landed close enough to knock me off my feet and leave my ears ringing for hours afterward. And then I heard Tommy scream. It wasn't a battle cry or a shout of anger. It was a scream of pain, raw and terrible, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield like nothing else could. I turned toward his foxhole and saw him lying on his back in the snow, clutching his stomach. Blood was spreading beneath him, staining the white ground crimson. I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was in my foxhole, and the next I was beside Tommy, pulling him down into better cover, my hands pressing against the wound in his abdomen. "Medic!" I screamed, though I knew the medics were overwhelmed, knew that it might be minutes or hours before anyone could reach us. "Medic!" Tommy looked up at me, his face pale and twisted with pain. "Jack!" he gasped. "Jack, it's bad." "You're going to be fine," I said, the lie coming automatically. "Just hold on. Help is coming." But I could see the wound, could see the dark blood pumping out between my fingers, and I knew that no medic was going to save him. I knew that my best friend was dying in my arms. "Don't lie to me," Tommy said, reading my face. "We promised we'd always be honest with each other." I wanted to keep lying, wanted to give him hope, wanted to believe it myself, but he deserved better than that. "It's bad," I admitted, my voice breaking. "It's real bad, Tommy." He nodded, a strange calm settling over his features. The fighting was still raging around us, bullets snapping overhead, explosions shaking the ground. But in that moment it all seemed far away, like it was happening in another world. "I'm scared, Jack," Tommy whispered. "I don't want to die." I didn't know what to say. What can you say to a dying man? What words could possibly be enough? So I just held his hand, gripping it tightly, trying to let him know he wasn't alone. "Remember the bar?" I said, tears streaming down my face. "Callahan and Mitchell's. Best Irish pub on the East Coast. You're going to be there when we open it. You're going to tend bar and tell stories and make everyone laugh." Tommy smiled, or tried to. "I like that idea," he said, his voice getting weaker. "Make sure you put up a picture of me. A good one, not that awful one from Basic where I look like a drowned rat. I'll find the best picture there is," I promised. "And I'll tell everyone about you, about how brave you were, about how you never gave up, never stopped fighting, never lost your smile even in the worst of it. Tell my mother," Tommy said, his grip on my hand loosening. "Tell her what we talked about. Tell her I wasn't scared." "You are scared," I said gently. "That's okay. That's human." Tommy shook his head slightly. "Tell her I wasn't. That's what she needs to hear. Promise me, Jack." "I promise," I said, knowing I would keep that promise even if it killed me. I promise." He smiled again, more genuinely this time. "You're a good friend, Jack Callahan. The best I ever had." "Right back at you," I managed to say, though my voice was barely working anymore. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the battle continuing around us, but seeming increasingly distant. Tommy's breathing was becoming shallower, his eyes starting to lose focus. I kept holding his hand, kept talking to him, telling him about the bar we were going to open, about the life we were going to have, about all the good things waiting for us after the war. I don't know if he heard me at the end. His eyes were fixed on the grey sky above us, his chest barely moving. But I kept talking anyway, kept painting pictures of a future that would never come, because I couldn't bear to let him die in silence. His last words were so quiet, I almost missed them. "Tell Molly I love her." And then he was gone. I don't know how long I sat there, holding the hand of my dead friend. It could have been minutes or hours. The battle eventually moved on. The Germans pushed back once again. Medics came and went, tending to the wounded who could still be saved. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Someone eventually found me, a sergeant from another platoon. He had to physically pull me away from Tommy's body, had to pry my fingers loose from Tommy's cold hand. I remember screaming at him, cursing him, trying to get back to Tommy's side. But he held me firmly, speaking calmly, telling me that there was nothing more I could do, that Tommy was gone, that I needed to keep living, as if it were that simple. The siege of Bastogne was lifted the next day, when elements of Patton's Third Army finally broke through the German encirclement. We were saved, technically. We had won, technically. But it didn't feel like victory. Not to me. I fought for the rest of the war like a man sleepwalking. I went through the motions, followed orders, did my duty. We pushed into Germany itself, crossing the Rhine, liberating towns and concentration camps, fighting the final battles of a war that was clearly ending. I saw things in those last months that I've never been able to forget, horrors that haunt me to this day, but nothing hurt as much as losing Tommy. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. I remember hearing the news, remember the celebrations around me, the joy and relief on everyone's faces, but I couldn't feel it. All I could feel was the weight of the letters in my pocket, the letters I had written to Tommy's family but hadn't yet sent. It took me another month to finish those letters. I must have written 100 drafts, trying to find the right words to tell his mother that her son was dead, that he had died bravely, that he hadn't been scared. Lies and truth mixed together, because some truths are too heavy to share and some lies are too kind to withhold. I sent the letters in June, just before I was shipped home. I included a photograph of Tommy and me, taken in England before D-Day, both of us grinning, like we didn't have a care in the world. I told his mother about our friendship, about how Tommy had looked out for everyone in the unit, about how he had saved my life when I was wounded in Holland. I told her that his last thoughts were of his family, that he died peacefully, that he wasn't scared. I kept my promise. When I got home, everything felt different. Millbrook looked the same, with its tree-lined streets and white church steeples, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I was a different person than the boy who had left 3 years earlier. I had seen too much, done too much, lost too much. The ordinary world seemed strange and foreign, like a place I was visiting rather than returning to. My parents tried their best to help me adjust. My mother cooked all my favorite meals, trying to fatten me up after years of army rations. My father sat with me in the evenings, not saying much, just being there. He understood, I think, in a way that no one who hadn't been to war could understand. He'd been through it himself, 25 years earlier. He knew that some wounds don't show on the outside. In August, I took a train to Chicago. I needed to see Tommy's family, needed to look his mother in the eyes and tell her about her son. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, harder even than the fighting, harder than holding his hand as he died. Mrs. Mitchell was a small woman with grey hair and Tommy's bright blue eyes. When she opened the door and saw me standing there in my uniform, she knew immediately who I was. "You're Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the one who was with him." I nodded, unable to speak. She pulled me into her arms and held me tight, this stranger who had been with her son in his final moments. And then she invited me inside, and I met the rest of the Mitchell family. I met Tommy's father, a big man with calloused hands and sad eyes. I met his brothers and sisters, including Molly, the 11-year-old he had talked about so much. She looked exactly as Tommy had described, with bright red hair and big blue eyes. She was quiet and reserved, watching me carefully from across the room. I spent 3 days with the Mitchells. I told them stories about Tommy, the funny ones he would have wanted me to tell. I told them about the bar we had planned to open, about the adventures we had in England and France and Belgium. I told them about his bravery, his kindness, his unshakable good humor. I painted a picture of a hero, because that's what he was, and that's what they needed to hear. On my last night there, Molly approached me while I was sitting on the front porch, looking up at the stars. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly, sitting down beside me. "Of course. Was Tommy really not scared? When at the end, I thought about the truth. About Tommy's whispered confession that he was scared, about the fear I had seen in his eyes. I thought about the promise I had made to him. Your brother was the bravest man I ever knew, I said, which was true. He faced everything with courage, and at the end, he was at peace. His last words were about you, Molly. He told me to tell you that he loves you." Molly's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. He always said that. Every time he left the house, even just to go to work, he'd call back, "Love you, Moll," like he was afraid he might forget. "He never forgot," I said. "Not for a second." She hugged me then, this little girl who had lost her big brother, and I held her the way I wished I could have held Tommy in those final moments. I made a silent promise to myself that I would look after this family, that I would honor Tommy's memory by being there for the people he had loved. I kept that promise too. Over the years, I stayed in touch with the Mitchell family. I visited Chicago whenever I could, watched Molly grow up and get married and have children of her own. I was there when Mrs. Mitchell passed away in 1962, and when Mr. Mitchell followed her 3 years later. I became a kind of honorary uncle to Tommy's nieces and nephews, a living connection to the brother and uncle they had lost. I never opened Callahan and Mitchell's, the Irish pub we had dreamed about. It didn't seem right to do it without Tommy. But I did name my first son Thomas, and I told him stories about his namesake, about the bravest and best friend a man could ask for. The years passed, as years do. I got married to a wonderful woman named Mary, who understood that part of my heart would always belong to the friends I had lost in the war. We had 3 children together, and they gave us 7 grandchildren. And now I have 5 great-grandchildren that I know of. Life went on, full of joy and sorrow and everything in between. But I never forgot Tommy, not for a single day. Every December 26th, no matter where I was or what I was doing, I would find a quiet place and sit with my memories. I would think about that frozen field outside Bastogne, about the fog and the snow and the blood. I would think about holding his hand, about the warmth slowly fading from his fingers. I would think about his smile, his laugh, his endless optimism, and I would talk to him. I know that sounds strange. A grown man sitting alone, talking to someone who's been dead for decades, but it brought me comfort. I would tell him about my life, about my family, about the world, and how it had changed. I would tell him about the things I was grateful for and the things I struggled with. I would tell him that I missed him, that I still wished things had been different, that I still carried him with me every single day. I think he heard me. I have no proof of that, Nothing that would hold up to rational scrutiny, but I felt his presence sometimes in moments of quiet and peace. I felt like he was watching over me, the way he had watched over everyone in our unit. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Maybe it's just the way our minds cope with loss, but it felt real to me, and that was enough. Now I'm over 100 years old. I've outlived almost everyone I knew from that time, both the friends I made and the family I built afterward. Mary passed away 12 years ago, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't miss her. But I'll see her again soon enough. I'll see all of them. And I'll see Tommy. I think about that reunion sometimes, about what I'll say to him when we finally meet again. Part of me wants to apologize for not being able to save him, for letting him die in that frozen field so far from home. Part of me wants to thank him for his friendship, for making the worst experience of my life bearable. Part of me just wants to hug him and never let go. But mostly, I think I'll just take his hand. The way I did at the end, when he needed someone to hold on to, the way I've been doing in my heart for all these years since, because that's what friendship means, isn't it? Being there for someone when they need you most. Holding on tight and not letting go, even when everything else is falling apart, carrying them with you, in your heart and your memory, long after they're gone. Tommy taught me that. He taught me so many things in the short time we had together. He taught me about courage and kindness and loyalty. He taught me about sacrifice and love and what it means to be a good man. He taught me that even in the darkest moments, there is always something worth fighting for, always someone worth holding on to. I've tried to live by those lessons. I've tried to be the kind of man Tommy believed I could be. I've tried to honor his memory by being kind to others, by facing my fears, by never giving up even when things seemed hopeless. I don't know if I've succeeded. I don't know if I've done enough. But I've tried. And I think that's what matters. If you've listened to this story, if you've stayed with me through all these memories, then I want to ask something of you. I want you to think about the people in your life who matter most to you. Your friends, your family, the ones who hold your hand when things get hard. Don't take them for granted. Don't assume you'll always have tomorrow to tell them how much they mean to you, because sometimes tomorrow doesn't come. Sometimes all you have is right now, this moment, this chance to say the things that need to be said. Tommy and I thought we had all the time in the world. We thought we'd grow old together, telling war stories in our Irish pub, watching our children play together. We thought we had a future. But the future isn't promised to anyone. All we have is now. All we have is this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. So use it wisely, love fiercely, hold on tight to the people who matter. And when the time comes to let go with grace, knowing that you did everything you could. That's what Tommy taught me. That's what I've tried to teach my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's the legacy I hope to leave behind. When my time finally comes, life is precious, love is precious, friendship is precious. Hold on to those things with both hands and don't ever let go. I held Tommy's hand until his last breath, there in that frozen field outside Bastogne, 80 years ago now. And in some ways, I've never let go. He's been with me through everything, a presence I carry in my heart. A voice I hear in quiet moments, a friend who never really left. Soon I'll see him again. Soon we'll sit down together wherever we end up, and I'll tell him about everything he missed. I'll tell him about the life I lived, the family I built, the world we helped to save. I'll tell him about Molly, about how she grew up to be a beautiful woman with children and grandchildren of her own. I'll tell him that I kept all my promises, every single one. And I'll thank him. I'll thank him for being my friend, for watching my back, for showing me what it means to be brave. I'll thank him for that conversation on Christmas Eve, for the plans we made, for the hope we shared even in the darkest times. Most of all, I'll thank him for letting me hold his hand at the end, for trusting me with his final moments, for giving me a purpose that has sustained me through all these years. Because when I held Tommy's hand as he died, something changed in me. I understood, in a way I never had before, the weight of human connection. I understood that we are all fragile, all temporary, all desperately in need of each other. I understood that the greatest gift we can give another person is simply to be present, to bear witness, to hold on. That understanding has shaped everything I've done since that day. Every relationship I've built, every kindness I've shown, every hand I've held when someone needed comfort. It all goes back to that moment, to Tommy, to a promise made and kept across the years. The war changed me, as it changed everyone who lived through it. I saw the worst of humanity and the best. I saw cruelty and courage, hatred and love, despair and hope. I lost friends I'll never forget and made memories I'll never escape. I came home a different man than the boy who left, and I've spent the rest of my life trying to make sense of what I experienced. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We are defined not by the battles we fight, but by the bonds we form. Not by our victories or defeats, but by the love we give and receive. Not by how we die, but by how we live. Tommy lived well. He lived with courage and kindness and an open heart. He made everyone around him better just by being himself. And when his time came, he faced it with the same grace he had brought to everything else. I hope I can say the same when my time comes. I hope that when I finally close my eyes for the last time, I'll have earned the kind of peace that Tommy found in those final moments. I hope that someone will be there to hold my hand the way I held his. But even if I'm alone, I won't really be alone, because Tommy will be there. He's always been there ever since that frozen December day when he slipped away and left me behind. He's been my companion through all the years, my guardian angel, my best friend. And soon we'll be together again. Until then, I'll keep telling stories. I'll keep honoring his memory. I'll keep living the life he would have wanted me to live, full of love and purpose and gratitude. Because that's what you do for the people you've lost. You carry them with you. You speak their names. You make sure they're never forgotten. Thomas Edward Mitchell, Tommy from Chicago, red hair, blue eyes, and a grin that could light up the darkest night. My friend, my brother, the bravest man I ever knew. I held his hand until his last breath. And in my heart, I'm holding it still. This is Jack Callahan, signing off. Thank you for listening to an old man's memories. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. And remember, hold on to the people you love. You never know how much time you have left. The snow was still falling when they carried Tommy's body away. I stood there watching until he disappeared into the fog, just another casualty of a war that had already claimed too many. But he wasn't just a casualty to me. He was my friend, my brother in arms, the best man I ever knew. The fighting continued for another few months. We pushed into Germany, crossed the Rhine, saw things that no human being should ever have to see. The concentration camps, the dead bodies piled like cordwood, the hollow eyes of the survivors. That's a whole other story, one I'm not sure I have the strength to tell. But through it all, I carried Tommy with me, his photograph in my pocket, right over my heart. His letters, the ones he had been writing to his mother when he died, folded carefully in my pack. His spirit, guiding me through the darkness, reminding me why we were fighting. When the war finally ended, when the guns fell silent and the world began the long process of healing, I made a vow. I vowed to live the life that Tommy never got to live. To experience the joys he would never know, to love the people he would never meet, to be worthy of the sacrifice he had made. It wasn't easy. There were dark nights when the memories overwhelmed me, when I wanted nothing more than to join Tommy wherever he had gone. There were moments of despair and anger and grief that threatened to swallow me whole. There were times when I wondered if surviving was really any kind of gift at all, but I kept going, because that's what Tommy would have wanted, because that's what I owed to him and to all the others who didn't make it home. because giving up would have meant that their sacrifices were in vain. So I lived. I married Mary in 1947, a beautiful girl I had known before the war, but hadn't had the courage to ask out. I told her about Tommy on our third date, cried in front of her for the first time, and knew that she was the one when she held my hand and didn't let go. We built a life together. A small house in Millbrook, not far from where I grew up. 3 children who filled that house with noise and laughter and chaos, jobs that paid the bills, vacations that made memories, holidays that brought family together. It was a good life, a blessed life. The kind of life Tommy and I had dreamed about during those long nights in the foxholes, whispering about the future to keep the fear at bay. I named my first son Thomas. When he was old enough to ask why, I told him about his namesake. Not the scary parts, not the bloody parts, but the important parts. How brave Tommy was, how kind, how he had saved his fellow soldiers countless times, not just through his actions, but through his spirit, his unshakable belief that things would get better. My son grew up knowing that he carried a hero's name, and he lived up to it, becoming a good man in his own right, raising children who will carry Tommy's legacy forward into generations I'll never see. Every year on December 26th, I would sit alone in my study and write a letter to Tommy. I told him about the year that had passed, about the things I was grateful for, about the challenges I had faced. I told him about his family, about the Mitchells and how they were doing. I told him that I missed him, that I still thought about him every day, that I still wished things had been different. Then I would burn the letters, watching the paper curl and blacken, imagining the smoke carrying my words up to wherever he was. Foolish, maybe, sentimental, but it brought me peace. It made me feel like Tommy was still part of my life, still listening, still there. Mary understood. She never questioned my ritual, never tried to talk me out of it. She would bring me a cup of tea afterward, sit with me in comfortable silence, hold my hand the way I had held Tommy's so long ago. God, I miss her. She passed in 2011, after 54 years of marriage. The doctors said it was her heart, that it just gave out one night while she was sleeping. But I think it was more than that. I think her heart was so full of love that it eventually couldn't hold any more. I hope to see her soon, her and Tommy both. In the meantime, I keep telling stories. I go to school sometimes, when they invite me to speak about the war. I tell the young people about what we went through, why we fought, what we sacrificed, not to glorify war, because there's nothing glorious about it, but to help them understand, to make sure they don't forget, because forgetting is the real enemy. Forgetting is how we let history repeat itself. Forgetting is how we dishonor the memory of those who gave everything. So I remember. I remember Tommy's laugh, his red hair, his ridiculous jokes. I remember the way he would share his last cigarette with a buddy, the way he would write letters home by candlelight, the way he would pray quietly before going into battle. I remember holding his hand in that frozen field, feeling the life slowly drain out of him. I remember his last words, his final request. Tell Molly I love her. I told her. I've told her 1,000 times over the years. And every time I see her, now an old woman herself with grandchildren of her own, I see Tommy looking back at me through those bright blue eyes. He's still here. In Molly, in my son Thomas, in everyone who carries a piece of his story forward. He's still here because we remember him, because we speak his name, because we refuse to let him be forgotten. That's the only kind of immortality any of us can hope for. Not living forever, but living on in the hearts and memories of those we leave behind. Tommy lives on, and as long as I draw breath, I'll make sure he continues to. The winter sun is setting now, casting long shadows across my room. Another December 26th almost over, another year gone by. I'm tired, more tired than I've ever been. But it's a peaceful tiredness, the kind that comes at the end of a long journey. I think I'll close my eyes for a while. Dream about Tommy, about the adventures we had and the ones we never got to have. Dream about Mary, about the life we built together. Dream about all the people I've loved and lost along the way. And maybe, when I wake up, they'll all be there waiting for me. Maybe the dream will become reality and I'll finally get to tell Tommy all the things I've been saving up to say. Until then, I'll hold on to the memories, the good ones and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, the love and the loss. Because that's all any of us can do, really. Hold on to what matters and let go of what doesn't. Live as fully as we can for as long as we're given. And when the end comes, face it with courage, knowing that we did our best. Tommy faced the end with courage. So did Mary. So did all the friends and family I've lost over these long years. I hope I can do the same. I hope I can make them proud. Thank you, Tommy, for everything. I'll see you soon, old friend. I'll see you soon.